Hello, guys and gals, me Mudahar, and boy oh boy, I got some real positivity to share today. Rockstar Games is fixing the GTA Defective Edition. Now, for anybody that obviously has seen any content in the past, I'm not going to play even clips of it. I have been talking about Grand Theft Auto, the Definitive Edition, since it was released 3 years ago. Every time it has had an upgrade, okay? Or at least an update. Now, to remind you guys, this was a trilogy of games that is very near and dear to me and plenty of people that especially grew up around that PlayStation 2 era where these games slapped. Now, the thing is, what was supposed to be a pretty awesome re-release of video games, you know, touched up a little bit, brought to modern standards, released in the most dog-shit state imaginable. You know, it's pretty bad when there is a 30-minute compilation exactly showing people just how bad things can really get with old games like this. To give you an idea, these are games that are initially released on the PS2 under the Renderware engine, and through, you know, studios like Grove Street Games, which we'll get to, they remade this underneath Unreal Engine. The problem is, these games are ports of broken mobile game versions that got ported to these Unreal Engine versions, and they came loaded with bugs and glitches and issues. So of course, ladies and gentlemen, clearly it required a serious amount of fixing. People roasted them when they came out, so since then, they actually got a patch. They were released to iPhones in collaboration with Netflix, where they actually did see a marginal improvement in the actual content released. But literally 2 days ago, 3 days, they got a big-ass patch. So for anybody that doesn't know, if you have the GTA trilogy, all the actual bonuses and fixes that got put on the phone version have been brought back to the console PC release. So it's time to look at exactly what they fixed up. Now, thankfully, there have been some people that have obviously brought up some screenshots to show, so I'm going to give you a little palette from Zach Cox TV. Underneath, you know, this hangar that originally was in, I believe, Las Venturas and the desert areas, it actually opens appropriately underneath the new patch. All right, congratulations, we managed to make doors work. And of course, thanks to Besk Infinity, this is what the actual game used to look like. Now, in the iPhone versions of the game, there was something that I noted and I brought up that blew people away at the time, was something known as classical lighting, where they actually brought back the original color tones of the original PlayStation 2 games into this new engine. So this is what Grand Theft Auto, the Definitive Trilogy, looked like on release. You can see how San Andreas has basically got this sort of like generic, I guess you could say lighting, engine that's just lighting the world in this pretty default, monotone way. Now with the classic lighting enabled, it looks more like this, ladies and gentlemen. You see that orange haze that made San Andreas on the PS2 so poppin'? That's there. A lot more life and color. What color grading can do to a game this old. Now, one thing that actually blew me away while researching for this video, again from Besk Infinity, was this tragedy that we have seen at the Francis International Airport. Now, for anybody that didn't know, when these games were being upscaled, there was a lot of artificial intelligence upscaling. A lot of stuff, a lot of errors actually ended up making their way through, which actually did get patched up as the game was released in its early heyday. But this is actually a tragedy. And thankfully, Francis International Airport can now be driven properly, okay? You don't need to take a college course to figure out how 2 fucking lanes work. I mean, this is actually pretty impressive stuff. And to be honest with you, all right, there's plenty of developers that could have easily given up. And I'm glad an indie company like Rockstar Games, and especially indie publishing house like Take-Two Interactive, saw it fit to actually fix up a trilogy that people paid $60 for. So congratulations on that one, guys. You did it. Now, even character models have apparently seen an upgrade. For instance, in GTA San Andreas, this was one of the girlfriends you could interact with, Denise. Now, in the original PS2, she looks like a fine woman. In the Definitive Edition, she looks like a deformed Disney character. Now, while it's not a total upgrade, she at least looks marginally better than what we've seen before, okay? Which, again, is kind of better than nothing. Now, obviously, I don't need to rely on, everyone else in the community finding their screenshots. So I wanted to show you a palette cleanser. I decided to put these into my actual PlayStation 5 and kind of research just how much things have changed in the trilogy I love so much. Now, to give you an idea, I am playing the PS4 versions of these games underneath the PS5. That's the only physical copy I could buy. They have not, from my understanding, released GTA Definitive Edition physically on PS5. Yeah, quite literally, all they have are like the PS4 versions of these trilogies. They have not ever released this for PS5, or from my understanding, like on the Xbox Series S and X. I don't know why they never released them physically, but it is what it is. Thankfully, if you're on the PS4, you also got the patch. Now, the first thing you'll notice about it is the actual introduction screen changes completely. So, to give you guys an understanding, the people that originally designed this tragedy was Grove Street Games. Grove Street Games have made titles like, or at least ported titles like Ark Survival Ascended, Ark Dinosaur Discovery, Ark Survival Evolved, and of course, as we all know, GTA the Definitive Edition. So while GTA the Definitive Edition is still referenced, they basically talk about Grove Street Games on the actual Rockstar Games store page, the actual game has removed all mentions of them and in fact replaced them with another development studio. One studio known as Video Games Deluxe, which is a studio that basically was formed off of an offshoot of Team Bondi, the guys who actually made L.A. Noire. And I believe these guys made L.A. Noire the case file, so a VR version of extra content underneath L.A. Noire, or I think it might have been the same content. I never really actually played that one. But yeah, these guys actually were the primary developers of GTA Trilogy on the Netflix supported stuff, so Android and iOS, and I guess now the rest of the world. So these guys ended up patching a whole shit ton of issues. Now to give you an idea, Grove Street Games was not just Grove Street Games. In fact, they used to formerly be known as War Drum Studios. The same studio who developed the mobile port versions of Grand Theft Auto Vice City 3 San Andreas on iPhone and Android initially like 10 years ago. So to give you an idea, these are games. The Definitive Edition is a port of the mobile port of the original games, okay? So that's how much portception is going on here. All right, crazy shit. So to go over exactly what has kind of changed between all three games, beyond just exorcing the entire mentioning of Grove Street Games, they brought back something known as classical lighting. Now, I think underneath classical lighting, the best benefit goes to Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Now, San Andreas is a game that is pretty much denoted by its orange haze in Los Santos, but people often forget that San Fierro and Las Venturas are two other cities in the game, and they both have a distinct visual style that also is represented as well. Now, before this patch whatsoever, and before classical lighting, these games all kind of had the same light setup throughout the world. In fact, even in the original version of the game, if you went all the way up into the air, there was literally no rendering of clouds, which made it to the point that you could literally see one end of the map to the other end, and really see how small the world of San Andreas was. And that really took away the feeling of you playing in a state versus, just a small little sandbox in retrospect. Now, with this patch, there have been volumetric clouds, so you got the actual depth of San Andreas pretty much back. And honestly, whether you're in Los Santos or you're in San Fierro or Las Venturas, they represent really well as originally you would imagine them on the PS2. So San Andreas ultimately gets the best benefit. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk about is obviously the clouds and the fog effect. Now, the classic lighting I don't think is just a color grade. If you look into the distance of any of the Grand Theft Auto games with the classical lighting enabled, one thing that really is noticeable is a haze or a fog that occurs in the distance. And if you're actually playing this game, that depth, that fog really adds to the size of the world, at least perceptually. If you play it with the normal, original lighting, everything just kind of, appears in view. So in the original PlayStation 2, for, again, the system limitations, you would have to add the fog, but that fog really made Los Santos feel at least 2 to 3 times bigger than what it actually really is. So a lot of these effects, beyond just color grading, actually add to the size and scope of San Andreas, which again, may I remind you, the previous 2 GTA games, 3 and Vice City, just take place in a city. San Andreas is supposed to be an entire state with 3 cities and 2 actual, big locations, like a desert and a countryside for players to travel around. And it's seriously a huge game in scope. Now, beyond just that, looking at the original trilogy, I would say GTA 3 already looked pretty much okay for me as it released. The classical lighting, yes, matches it closer to the original dreariness of the PlayStation 2, but I don't really think this game needed a whole lot more. I think it was fine pretty much when it came out. Vice City gets a massive boost. Beyond San Andreas matching the vibe, Vice City absolutely hits with the sunsets, and it actually hits with that classic lighting because, once again, that haze effect in the distance adds extra depth, and it adds a sort of size to the city that normally you wouldn't see, without any of these like post-processing effects tossed in. The color grading matches what, again, you would resemble in the original PlayStation 2, and the neon lights look prettier as a result. But one thing that's really cool in Vice City is actually some of the foliage came back. So generally, in the first section of the game, by the actual Vice Beach, there is a lot of hedge and foliage that was just never in the original game at all, the original definitive release. So it was actually added in as of this patch. So actual content, things that flesh out the world have been brought back. It's not just a color grading fix. There are some serious patches that bring these games closer to the definitive title than the defective title. So to go over an entire list of things over here, one of the things that people had found was the ability to pause cutscenes in these titles. So if you wanted to pause, anything, because you have to go to the bathroom and take a shit, you can do that now. Shadow movement. Typically in the older games, the shadows would just jank and jank and jank all throughout the place as the time of day moved forward. But here, shadow movement appears to be fixed up a little bit. There's a new fire effect, so generally when you're blowing things up, things look a little prettier. There's better light bloom effects amongst all of these titles, and the crappy parallax interior effects that literally made San Andreas look like a fucking student project have finally been removed and fixed up so that they're not super jarring as you play the game. And the water, I'm not able to confirm it, looks prettier than I remember when I first actually played this definitive edition. So when it comes to games like Grand Theft Auto 3, there's actually animations that have returned. So Claude will actually, fucking flip the bird at actual, cops and traffic. There are actual, fixes to, garages not opening properly. There are better, collision issues that have been fixed up as well. So even in the original game, there were a lot of bugs where you could just fall through the ground. Those have been fixed up even back then, but now it's just a much more, solid project throughout. One thing that's really good, and you'll notice it in GTA 3 and Vice City, is if you're using shotguns, if you're using assault rifles, or a flamethrower, you can actually move and shoot at the same time. All of this actually adds to these games playing closer to something like Grand Theft Auto 4 or Grand Theft Auto 5. Again, one of the things that these games were built with was matching that sort of modern play style of later Grand Theft Auto entries. So now these games feel a lot more snappier. The animations have been fixed up. So it really feels like more of that proper remaster, a remake, than they actually do just, again, a shitty Unreal Engine art project. So when it comes to Vice City, again, that whole ability of moving and shooting also extends to Vice City as well. Again, the vegetation is all back. San Andreas, I think, does the best, okay? No more do we have to deal with the anatomy of a gangster. These things have been fixed up. And again, beyond just those things being completely restored, the clouds have, again, like I said, come back. There are actual effects that have finally returned. And while all the player models, even though they're apparently supposed to be improved, aren't even close, in my opinion, in some cases, to the original PS2, it's still a far fucking cry better than what originally we got on this game 3 years ago. So I guess in the end of the day, what I want to talk about is this worth it? Is buying the definitive edition actually something that you can even consider? Now, somebody that loves Grand Theft Auto games, okay, I love these titles to death. Playing Grand Theft Auto games, especially older titles, can be annoying underneath the PC. The amount of patches one has to go through, setting things up, making sure things don't crash. These are games that are literally 17 to 20 years old. Their PC versions weren't that great when they came out, and they sure as shit aren't great in today's day and age. But if you're willing to patch those older games and you still have them, you can get a pretty decent experience. I personally usually stick to emulating the PS2 versions of these games with a higher resolution and call it a day. But if you're somebody where, you want to deal with frame rates above 60 without having the game freak the fuck out, then I don't think these are actually bad versions anymore. A lot of the stuff has gotten so fixed up at this point that I think as long as you install maybe a radio restoration fix to bring back Billie Jean for Vice City, which it's very easy to set up, by the way, These versions are pretty awesome. And I think for anybody that is probably dipping their toe into Grand Theft Auto for the first time, I definitely can feel that those older games, the PS2 trilogy, can be a little jarring for a lot of newer gamers, right? Like with no checkpoints and kind of a shoddy anti-aim or auto-aim system, which again, to be honest, the Grand Theft Auto series is not known for the best aiming mechanics or auto-aim systems, personally speaking. I think these are great trilogies for somebody who is just getting into the franchise to actually experience peak once again. Look, with GTA 6 on the horizon, I'm actually glad that Rockstar is remastering some of these old games, or at least fixing them up to the point where you can actually play these instead of make fun of them the entire time. Look, at the end of the day, I want games to be successful, and I want the Definitive Edition to actually be a Definitive Edition. I think as long as you restore the radio for some of these games, and even then it's really a personal preference, the gameplay is solid enough to recommend. The visuals have been updated enough, obviously with these classic lighting fixes, to be a recommendation, a way to play the game that is not a, laughable joke compared to its original like releases like 17 to 20 years ago. These are great remasters, or I wouldn't say great remasters, but they're definitely a good, they're definitely good enough to be playing. Now, would I wait on a personal sale for these? Probably so. But I think with Rockstar taking it a little seriously, I really think as GTA 6 starts to enter its hype cycle, these games will get more and more updated. And I really think that at the end of the day, Video Games Deluxe did a pretty good job fixing up this tragedy of a mess the best that they could. And honestly, at this point, I feel like maybe letting them off the leash and maybe giving us a 60 FPS patch for Red Dead 2 on the PlayStation 5, maybe. But that's a whole different thing right there. I think Rockstar's kind of taking this stuff a little bit more seriously, with Red Dead Redemption 1 recently releasing on PC and actually being a pretty good port. I wonder if the next thing these guys are going to be doing is maybe porting the GTA 4 Complete Edition at some point over on a newer systems, or maybe updating it on PC so it doesn't require you to constantly patch the game to get running. Would be an interesting thing to see. But yeah, the GTA Definitive Edition, it's not so much the Defective Edition anymore. I wanted to talk about it because I like GTA, and as long as there's some positivity going on, you bet that I'm going to talk about it. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it, I am out.